Hi everybody, and welcome to the latest VodCast from Honors Biology at Desert Ridge High School. I'm Mr. Galladay, and today we're going to be talking about communities. No, we're not talking about the banker and the baker and the candlestick maker that lives in your town. We're talking about ecological communities and the interactions that go on inside of them. So this is a good place to update your table of contents, update the organization in your notebook, because here we go. First thing we should do is maybe come back and revisit some definitions about levels of organization, what we mean by some of these terms. Population is one that we've been talking about an awful lot lately, and so you should know that that means that's all the members of one species that interact in a particular place. One species means that they are able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring, and so if all of these things living in one particular place, that is a population. Populations, lots of populations, make up a community. If you go out walking in the desert and you can sort of just in your mind sort of edit out all of the non-living aspects of that place where you hike, all of the sunshine and the air and the moisture in the ground and the moisture that falls from the sky, and just think about the living things, the plants, the animals, the bacteria, the fungi, all of those things that you saw. Those are the biotic factors. That's the community. All of the living things that live in a particular place. So they're all living and interacting in a particular location. That's a community. Now an ecosystem is when we talk about all of the things in that particular place. How much sunshine does a place get in a particular year? How much rainfall does it get or not get during a year? What's the average temperature? What are the kinds of nutrients that are in the soil? What sorts of things are lacking in the soil? All of those are aspects, non-living aspects of the environment that make up the ecosystem. Okay, so one term that gets thrown around an awful lot is habitat. Habitat is where an organism lives. One of the things about habitat that we often misunderstand is that a habitat has to provide all of the needs for a particular organism. For example, its food, its water, its cover, and the space. All of those are aspects of habitat, and all of if you think about it, the only place an animal can get its food, can get its water, is from its habitat. So some examples of these that you may kind of imagine would be a place like this, right, where we've got some grassland, we've got some water, and so it's pretty easy to see how the habitat can provide all of those needs for these animals that you can see in this picture. Now if you look at some place like where we live, where you go outside and it might look something like this, this is still the habitat for many living things. Obviously one of the things that you're going to notice right away is that picture of the desert. It's a little bit tougher to get things like water. However, there's plenty of sunshine and plenty of space. The cover might be a little tricky, but certainly all of those other aspects can be provided for. If you look at a picture like this, yes, that penguin there can get all of its needs from that particular habitat. All of its needs for food, water, shelter, and space are all provided from its habitat. Now a picture like this, which is a lot of times what we imagine when we think of a habitat, this is not really the habitat, because there's only one thing being provided for that raccoon in that place, and that's some shelter or some cover in that particular picture. So that's not really a picture of its habitat. That's a picture of a place where it's getting some cover. Now, as humans, we might think of that or associate that with home, but that's not an accurate representation of that animal's habitat. Competition is something that we talk a fair amount about. Different organisms require sometimes the same or similar resources from the same habitat at the same time. When that conflict comes up, we call that competition. Now we have two types of competition. One is when we have competition among individuals that are part of the same species. We call that intraspecific. Intra or internally specific, so within that particular species. These are organisms that natural selection is going to play out in that particular scenario, because somebody's going to come out on top and they are going to be able to provide to pass their genes on to the next generation. Interspecific competition is a little different. This is where we are competing between different species for the same resource. So when the habitat has to provide similar resources for different species at the same time, we call that interspecific. And it turns out that this really doesn't happen very often. Because of natural selection, species try to evolve, or they end up evolving in ways that avoid interspecific competition. Now there are some specific or very I started to say unique, and that's not really true. Symbiotic relationships are not unique, but they do happen a lot between different living things, and they fall into three categories. In general, what they all have in common is when we have two or more organisms that live together, and by living together that means that one of them lives on, inside, or in very close proximity to the other. So this is a prerequisite for symbiotic relationship. One of the organisms has to live on, that means inside of, or on the surface of, or in very, very close proximity to the other one. This can be temporary or for a longer period of time, and at least one of the organisms receives a benefit from this relationship. So these fall into three broad categories. One condition in which both organisms benefit. This is called a mutualistic relationships, where both organisms benefit. When one is benefited and one is harmed, we call that a parasitic relationship, or an example of parasitism, when one receives a benefit but the other is harmed. And in cases where one organism benefits and the other is really unaffected, we call that a commensalism, or a commensalistic relationship, and that's a situation where one benefits and the other is harmed. Now keep in mind that in all these situations, these are the basis for a symbiotic relationship, where one lives on, inside, or very near the other. So for example, a lion eating a gazelle is not a symbiotic relationship. That is not a parasitic relationship, because the lion and the gazelle don't live in that close a proximity to each other. They live in the same general region, but one doesn't live on, in, or very, very close to the other. Okay, some examples of these that you might be familiar with from our area is the example of the mistletoe, right? And in this case, mistletoe is a plant, or a plant-like organism. It is a plant. It is a parasitic organism. You see the mistletoe right here. If you were to notice this tree, you might just think that it has a very heavy growth in one area, but if you look closer, you'll see that this is in fact two different species. The mistletoe is in fact a parasite. It draws water away from the palo verde, from the host tree. The host tree is growing these very extensive root systems to get water from the ground, and the parasite doesn't have to do that. So the mistletoe gets its water by sort of stealing the water from the host. And in this example, the mistletoe is obviously getting a benefit from living on the palo verde tree. The palo verde is being harmed, so this is a case of parasitism. Another example of a symbiotic relationship is one that's shown in this picture. You might think, well, this is just a picture of a cactus, but if you look closely in the middle, you'll see that there's a bird's nest in here, right? And in this case, the birds have built a nest right in the middle of this cholla cactus. The cactus wren that has built this nest is getting a very, very well protected nesting site. The cactus is relatively unharmed, relatively unaffected, and this is a commensalism relationship, because obviously the cactus wren gets a benefit, but the cholla cactus in this case is unharmed. It really doesn't matter one way or the other. It's unaffected. So this is a commensalistic relationship. Another example is one of a mutualistic relationship, and I'm going to talk about this relationship. This is takes a little bit of more description. The case of the yucca moth is one that lives in our area. Yucca moths are a pollinator, and they pollinate this plant yuccas, which live in our area. Now the yuccas it's a flower or a plant that blooms in the early part of summer. You may start seeing them bloom as early as May, but usually it's into June when you see them really getting into full flower. And if you look closely at these things, you may see that there's these little teeny tiny white moths, and they are pollinated by this little moth called the yucca moth. The yucca moth will carry pollen, but they don't eat it the way honeybees and some other pollinators do. The pollen is contained in these little packets right here. The yucca moth will come to a yucca flower, and it will take extra care, and it's going to remove these pollen and carry them to another plant or to another flower, and it's going to be very careful to see that the stigma of the one flower receives some pollen from another plant. They do this behavior. It's a rather complex behavior, but they go to great trouble to do this. And then after they're done pollinating, the female is going to then deposit her eggs in the ovary of the flower. This is the ovary of the flower right here, and this is what's going to develop into the fruit. So over time, the yucca's fruit are going to develop. This is the fruit of the yucca plant, and then this is the sort of what's left of the flower, which is dried up. So this would be later in the summer, August or September. You're going to see these big globby looking things hanging on the tops of yuccas, and these are the fruit. Now if you were to take one of these fruits and cut it open, you would see that there are some larvae living in there, and these are in fact the larvae of the moth. The larvae of the moth are going to eat some of the seeds, but they don't eat all of them. They only eat a few of them. And the pods are going to protect both the seeds and the larvae through the summer, through the winter. The moth that pollinated the flower, they're going to die, and so they get through the rest of the summer in the form of the larva. So the moth, or the adult form, very short-lived, and the larva, in fact, is what is going to survive throughout the rest of the summer. Now, by living through the summer in this little fruit or the pod of the yucca plant, it's protected from the heat, it has access to some moisture, it has access to some food, and this is what's going to allow it to get through that tough part of the year. The following spring, these pods are going to open up. They're going to release the seeds from the yucca, and also the adult moths are going to fly away and go searching for new yuccas to pollinate. Now, in this example, the yucca plant gets pollinated by a very efficient, a very motivated insect. It's a very specialized insect. And the moth larvae, of course, receive a safe place to grow and develop into adults. They are able to avoid the hot part of the summer. They're able to have some protection during the winter. So both of these organisms are getting a benefit. So this is very definitely a mutualistic relationship, because of course the yucca moth larva lives inside of the plant. So this definitely qualifies as a mutualistic relationship, as opposed to honeybees, which basically just fly around and look for flowers. They're not a mutualism because they don't live inside of the flowers the way yucca moths do. This brings up the idea of a niche. Ecological niches are the description of the role a species plays in a biological community. And we can have either a very broad niche. A generalist would have a broad niche, and a specialist would have what we call a very narrow niche. So honeybees, for example, are pollinators in their environment. But honeybees are not fussy at all about what kind of flower they get their pollen from. This one's going to a dandelion. It could then turn around and go to any other flower. Honeybees are a very broad generalist, so they have a very broad niche. Now, you may have learned about cactus bees, which are a little bit more specialist. They also are pollinators, but they only pollinate from a few species of prickly pear cactus. So they are a somewhat narrower niche than a honeybee, but they're still broader than the yucca moth. And the yucca moth we see over here on the right, very, very specialized animal, very narrow niche. So they are very much a specialist, and they have a narrow niche. And on this note of niches and honeybees and pollinators and so on, I'm going to end this podcast. This is Mr. Galladay for Honors Biology at Desert Ridge High School, and I hope you have a great day.